Games Workshop makes some of, if not the best miniatures on the market today. They have beautiful paint jobs, intricate details, and dynamic posing. However, what happens when one of those areas falls flat? In this case, we are going to be checking out Games Workshop's worst pose model, the Helbrute, and fixing it. Welcome back to Grimdark Minis. So this is one of my first real forays into hacking up a model and sculpting on a lot of detail, so I want to come up with a plan. In my head, I'm wanting this model to relate back to its aggressive appearance. Right now, it just stands there in a static T-pose. With the other models in my word bearers, I try to integrate a variety of heights into the poses, so I want to continue that here. I want him to think about stepping over some rubble, using that to push off as he lumbers forward, leering down at his targets. Looking at some references, that means his back leg is going to be driving the bus, and should be activated, driving his body forward, while his left leg is readying for the next bound. I also want his arms in a much more level pose. I'm pretty sure looking at this that I can accomplish that with the default kind of low shoulder pose if we just angle the body a little bit. The last thing is that Helbrutes, despite the modern depiction of them eating a Dreadnought assault cannon in Space Marine 2, are actually on the tabletop about half the size of a Primaris Dreadnought, so I'm looking to add just a bit of height compared to the standard one, thinking a bit of a stretched skin stomach to make up the difference. Now that we have a plan, I think I can get away with just sculpting and hacking away at a couple of bits of this model, but let's find out. So on to building. I want to put together his main body first before I get into any posing. That's going to allow me to see the scale of him before nailing down any final decisions. To put him together, I'm going to be using Tamiya extra thin plastic cement. In my opinion, it's the best stuff out there for model assembly of plastic kits. The little brush that comes with it is going to allow you to get into nooks and crannies and be a lot more precise than with a standard bottle and spout. When you're doing this, just make sure that if you're doing a non-plastic kit, that you use something like super glue. Otherwise, you're going to get nowhere with it. So with this, I'm just going to go ahead and put together the main chassis of him, the head, as well as the kind of main body, leaving off the arms and legs at this point. An important note, at this point I am changing nothing, I'm just going straight off the directions if you're following along. And now comes the fun part that everybody's been waiting for, and by that I mean the terrifying part of converting. Hacking up your $60 miniature in an attempt to make something cool. The Helbrute's legs are made up of three main parts. You got the groin and legs, feet, and shin guards. This makes my choices for posing non-existent, and as the only option for the legs are kind of 90-degree angle to the ground, as you can see in every model that's built from them. So to hack this piece up, I'm going to start on the left leg hip joint. I'm going to leave the right leg alone, so deep breath, and here we go. I'm starting with my sprue clippers and going to start hacking away at this. I want as clean of a cut as I can get before, just to make this next bit a little bit easier to clean up. So I take turns alternating between my clippers and hobby knife until I eventually pop through and have a separate leg. Looking back, probably should have grabbed my hobby saw for this, but kind of forgot that I had it. So in the shuffle, brute force, one out, fairly on brand for the model, I think. So the most important bit of this is going to be setting up the posing. So to do that, I first need to get the base set. So I essentially want his right foot back and his left foot perched up on something, because after all, everyone deserves their own tactical rock. To do this, I'm going to grab some cork and dab just a couple drops of my superglue gel on before pushing this onto the base. I'm doing the majority of the base in cork as I do want the extra height. The Brute feels so stubby, especially compared next to like a normal sized Dreadnought at this point. So trying to help the little fella out with that. For some reason, I find myself always adding height to models. I guess I'm really just not a fan of modeling for advantage, not sure. So with that, our cork in place, I can get our model mocked up. To do this, I'm going to take a small little ball of putty and put it inside the ball joint, just to give it a little bit of extra height and allow for it to be removed after I've effectively dry fit everything. This allows me to set up my feet and legs in the approximate locations that I want them and get an accurate guide of the size and scale of our model. Next come drilling and pinning. I essentially want to set up an armature for this, using paper clips to act as my bones. This is going to help us with posing. That's also going to help us give us something, a base to kind of sculpt onto with our epoxy putty. So to insert them, I'm going to take the tip of my hobby knife and twist it just a few times to start off a hole. Then I'm going to take my small pin vise with a bit slightly larger than the paper clip and drill out the entrance hole. Once this is established and both sides are connected via paper clips, I then can get it into the relative position I like, give it just a dab of my gel super glue. This is going to give me a long working time to kind of get this set the way I want it, while also helping to passively fill this giant gap that I created when I hacked this apart. And now that I've got the hips together, I'm going to replicate the process on both legs. I'm going to keep two things the same here. One, the length of the pins, and two, their connection point on the legs. Both pins were measured to the same length, as I want the legs to be as close as possible in size. This guy might be a bit of a freak of nature, but if nothing else, he's going to look a little funny if one leg is about half the length of the other. So I went ahead and made their connection points into the tubing that was originally used to connect the leg to the foot. This, for all intents and purposes, is now going to act as our knee joint. It also gives us a good connection point to pin into. I can then drill out the point in the middle of the feet, and bam, I have a posable model to a certain extent. From here, I can mess with it to get it exactly how I want. Once I've got it in position, I go ahead and use a little bit of UV cure resin to solidly lock it in place. Trust me, once that's on there, it is not going anywhere. Sculpting musculature is not something I've really done before, especially not to this degree. So I'm going to have to rebuild this guy essentially from the knee down. So that's going to mean a few muscles above the knee and mainly the calf below. To do this, I'm going to use milliput. It is a 2-part epoxy putty that is a lot softer and easier to sculpt on than something like green stuff. When I do tubing or parchment, I do prefer green stuff because of its rigidity, but for this, that's only going to kind of get in the way. Milliput works like any other 2-part epoxy. To get it activated, all you do is mix equal parts of the two sides until you get one color without streaks, and then you're ready to go. Now after a lot of pre-work, it is finally time to start sculpting and filling our gaps. So I'm going to go ahead and take a big blob of milliput and start forming it around our paperclip, using these pipe connections as our knee joint. One thing that I realized basically right off the rip was the importance of having water in your tools. A lot of people also recommend Vaseline. I don't have any of that on hand, so water's going to have to do. Otherwise, you end up with putty flaking off like you can see here. I also realized just how easy it is to sculpt with milliput very quickly. I ended up switching from my big flat silicone sculpting tool to a canonical pointed one. This worked infinitely better when combined with water. I get basically little to no flaking and was able to accurately sculpt what I wanted. After working it into one unified glob of meat, it's finally time to start putting in some details. With this, I'm basically just taking a lot of light pushes and pulls with my tool to shape this into place. One thing that I was sure of was that my shin guard was going to take care of a lot of the heavy lifting on this, so I wanted to get that set into place early. That way I knew exactly how much leg I had to actually detail. That covered the majority of the front-facing surface, leaving just a bit of area at the knee that's going to need some work, as well as the back of the calf. With that in place, I started working in some details. With miniature painting, it's really important to have exaggerated detail or else things won't be seen. Edges won't be easy to define, and it's just going to appear messy and disorganized. When you take a second to look at the sculpted detail on the existing leg, it's a perfect example. It is all muscle, but has distinct raised edges and creases in between that are very deep. This has very little flat space, so for that I aim to emulate that here, as I see it as a really good example of how GW does musculature, and after all, we're trying to reflect that and work our new design into the existing model. While I was working on this, I spent a lot of time going back and forth with reference images of lower legs, trying to get this giant abomination somewhat close to a real-life person would have for musculature. After a lot of back and forth, I ended up with something I was happy with, so I stepped away and I let it dry before moving on to the next leg. For the right leg, I followed the same basic process with one major exception. The calf on this leg is activated and actively pushing this guy forward, so the muscle needs to be tight, along with the skin holding it in place. So for this side, I tried to define that muscle group much more close to the body and considerably less lumpy than the left side. Same as the left side, the shin guard was able to pull a lot of the weight here, covering up essentially all of the exposed leg on the front and allowing me to spend a lot more time sculpting detail onto the back. With this, a lot of the reference images that I was seeing was basically a large divot in the back of the top of the calf. That gives us a lot of definition as well as kind of relating this back to the real world. From there, I wanted to incorporate the back side of the shin guard into this, as people are actually going to be able to see it. So I wanted to kind of push and pull my putty to make it look like the skin was stretched and connecting up to the back of it. At the end, it gives like a really kind of gross looking result that I'm super excited to paint. With both of my legs wrapped up, I'm going to go ahead and move on, and don't tell anybody, but I'm going to phone in the hip joint a little bit. We have a lot of meat here, so essentially we're just going to follow the same steps as the previous two areas. I'm going to focus on sculpting in folds in the skin, as though this has been pulled tight and then kind of twisted and wrapped around wiring. This part doesn't need to be quite as detailed as the other two, as it's fairly obscured, and then in the next few steps I'm going to have wires running over it anyways, so I just kind of want to get this step done, as I'm super excited to get going on the rest of it. For this, same deal, big blob of milliput right on there, and then just pushing and pulling and kind of popping off bits as I don't need them anymore. For all of these, I ended up putting a little bit too much on to begin with, and then slowly working them away and putting them off to the side to be used at a later step. At this point, I am super pumped. I can see my vision coming together from the initial sketches to where we are now. The legs are in the pose that I want, honestly a lot similar and closer to the initial design that I thought they would be. And they just need to be integrated into the base to feel really grounded. Next is going to come the body. As I'd said before, our little fella is by default about half the size of a normal Primaris Dreadnought, so I want to give him a bit of a lift. To do this, I'm going to take a ball of milliput, squish it into place under his body, and this is going to give us two things: height, and most importantly, posability. This is going to allow me to kind of work him into an angle that I like, and then once I have that, I'm going to fold the excess milliput over that's kind of pushing up over the sides to look like exposed belly skin and just tie it into the rest of the model. At this point, I can really feel that we're in the home stretch, so I'm going to keep moving into his arms. For this, I'm going to use the hammer for the left and the heavy plasma for the right. Hammer, because it helps the overall menacing silhouette, and it's really good in game, and plasma, because it's cool to have a glowing component on a model. What can I say? I'm going to be building these up as default, using my Tamiya Extra Thin to go ahead and lock these into place before moving on to dry fitting. I went back and forth about which one I preferred, but honestly I think the low shoulder option on both the left and right arm give me the exact pose that I want, so I'm going to lock that in on both sides. That honestly makes the top half of this model exceptionally easy to assemble in comparison to the bottom. We can essentially just kind of put this together as intended, and because of our earlier steps in posing, this means that this model has a totally different silhouette and fits our purposes a lot better than the original. Now with our model actually assembled, I am so excited. The silhouette looks great, he's leaning over, and you can kind of picture him squashing a puny Space Marine underfoot or with his big old hammer. Now to put the finishing details and better integrate our sculpting into the default and basic model. I'm going to go ahead and take some milliput and roll it into a thin tube. This is going to replace the cabling that we cut off in step 1 of this model. I can put a tiny dab of gel superglue on the points that I want to connect to lock it into place. When I was sculpting, importantly, I went ahead and left some of these connection points. That way it really flows and everything looks like it's supposed to. One note, I realized after this first one that green stuff is honestly just way better for tubes due to its rigidity, so after this tube, I switched to green stuff. And because this guy is slotting into my word bearers, I had to give him some parchment for his fellow cultists to write on before sending him into battle. For this, I followed the same method as I had done in my previous word bearers video, of flattening out green stuff using a sculpting tool, working in some little folds, sticking into place, and then kind of conforming it to our model and forward-moving pose. And with that, it is time for a reveal to see if we truly fixed Games Workshop's worst pose model. So after seeing it in all of its glory, what do you think? We took something that's meant to be one of the scariest abominations in the battlefield from a static, T-posing miniature to a truly dynamic and opposing force. Overall, I love this miniature, I love everything behind it, and honestly, the lore of these creatures is awesome. Recently, kit bashing and converting has been something I've desperately been enjoying. There's just something about creating our own models that really excites me. I know that I could take this guy to a tournament, and I would be the only one with a truly dynamic shaped Helbrute. If you liked what you saw, please leave a like and comment telling me other models that are in desperate need of a tune-up, and let's see if we can fix it. It truly does help me out. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I will catch you all in the next one.